Hello, hello, hello. This is Gresh from the I Am CEO podcast. I have a very special guest on the show today. I have Craig Colvett. Craig, it's awesome to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me here. Appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. Super excited to have you on and talk about all the awesome things that you're doing. And of course, before we do that, I want to read a little bit more about Craig so you can hear about all the awesome things that he's doing. And Craig Colvett is a life and leadership coach from Denver, Colorado. He focuses on helping people effectuate change to better themselves, whether that is in their career, personal relationships, mental health, time management, or transition periods. Through his 2 decades of experience in the financial sector, Craig has established a reputation for helping people with all of the non financial elements of retiring, including finding their purpose, improving their mental health, and making sure they have a plan for social interaction. And I always say that we forget about the human part of business and honestly the human part of life at that. And it sounds like Craig is able to kind of speak and help people directly through those human parts. We think about all the nuts and bolts, but we forget about like who are you going to speak into, where's your mental, all those things. It sounds like Craig kind of works with. And I love that he has to start in that financial industry and has so much experience, but he helps people out with those quote unquote other parts that I don't know if he would argue that may or may not be as important or maybe even more important when you're setting those things up. So, Craig, excited to have you on the show. Are you ready to speak to the IMCO community?
Absolutely. Let's go for it.
Let's get it started then. So, to kind of kick everything off, let's rewind the clock a little bit, hear a little bit more on how you got started. What I call your CEO story.
Yeah, absolutely. We can come back to that argument question that you just brought up too if we have time, because I could
Yes.
definitely make the argument there without a problem. So yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, basically graduated college. I became a financial advisor. Yeah, I bring this up because it's important, right? Early on, as an advisor, I was basically helping people craft and execute a financial plan, right? And being younger, I think one of the things we all lack is perspective. And so as time wore on, flash forward to somewhere around 2018, 2019, I became a father. At that point, I had 3 young kids. So being a parent definitely starts to shape that perspective and give you a different lens. And also the pandemic was starting to happen, right? So right at the beginning of 20, you have the pandemic that came to be. And so I just started to think a bit about what else I could do with my time, quite frankly, on Earth, or overly dramatize it a bit, right? And I thought about some different paths that I could go, again, with my skill set. I enjoyed engaging with humans, and I thought, how can I help them? And one of the things that the pandemic highlighted was really how, on a basic level, many people were struggling. So, like a basic level, meaning day to day, their family, their primary relationship, ailing parents. There's a lot at play. And again, being a somewhat new parent, at that point, my oldest was about 4, but still kind of growing into that role and recognizing the challenges, I thought, well, gosh, what an opportunity here to potentially be in front of these people and be there to support them in a way that they may not be getting. And that also is not, just to kind of delve into coaching a little bit, coaching is not prescriptive. So I don't sit down with you, Gresh, and I don't say, here's what you need to do. Instead, I curiously explore, what do you want to be doing? How are you spending your time? What support do you need? What's working? What's not working? And so what that allowed for me was, number one, it took me out of the expert role. I don't have to be the expert at anything. I have to be a good listener. I have to be engaged. I have to keep a little bit of a roadmap, if you will. I like to tell people that I coach, you're driving, I'm navigating. So I'm keeping my eye on the road, but I'm also mapping out where it is you want to end up. And so trying to balance those two. And so flash forward, all these things sort of thrown into a pot. Okay, what options exist, right? And becoming a coach was one of them. And I simultaneously am running the business of Coach 360, which is essentially a connector from my past life, if you will, where I was working with financial advisors. And now tying that into life coaching, because again, kind of back to your argument conversation, the recognition that money is just the means. There's something always on the other side of money that people are grasping for, that they want to get to. And that's what I wanted to help them achieve.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate that. And I think one of the words I was listening to, one of the other interviews that you've done and before, preparing for this, and I think the word that came up was value. And I think so many times that people especially I think you're talking specifically around retirement, where your day to day changes on a regular basis, and you start to have to understand how you define yourself, how you have that value. And as you kind of spoke to, I feel like we all have and probably are still going through some of that understanding of what our value is, what our purpose is, all those things as a result of the pandemic. It kind of brought a little bit more awareness around that. So that kind of sounds like a little bit more of like what those conversations you are having with the people that you work with.
That's a big part of it, Gresh, is right, is helping folks recognize, because it's very easy, again, especially being coming from the parent perspective. A lot of times you just kind of get in these paths, and it's kind of the path of least resistance, right? There's something to be said for familiarity. And even if some people don't like what they do, there's familiarity to it, right? So it's easy to stay in those grooves, stay in those channels. And at some point, if sometimes perspective gets forced on us, right? So we've all
Mhm.
seen movies or TV shows around somebody maybe getting a bad health diagnosis or suddenly the death of a loved one. And all of a sudden they reevaluate what's important. And something that I've personally always believed is I don't want to have to wait for one of those moments to happen to me to reevaluate what's important and how I'm spending my life. And so that's what I want folks to recognize is there is a way, there's a partner out there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a coach, but it could be, to just simply reevaluate. Where are you right now? What arc are you on? Do you like it? Are you even remotely happy, or are you miserable, or somewhere in between? Let's pull it apart. I like to say I like to slow things down, right? So we've grown used to watching things on 1.5 speed. I want to watch it on like zero point 0.3 speed, right?
Mhm.
Because what it allows you to do, we were talking before we came on the air, we were talking a little about football, right?
Mhm.
And one of the things you hear about young guys going to the NFL is the speed of the game. Well, that doesn't tend to serve them well. It feels like a flash. And I just want to slow things down for people and help them say, okay, let's sort of take apart my life piece by piece, and let's just sort of reassess. And kind of to your comments, what are my values? And let's reassess through the lens of one's value system.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And that's why I love that kind of analogy and metaphor you kind of spoke to of like helping people along the life markers, kind of like that GPS, because I think so many times we don't, and I imagine because we're so close to our life, we don't see that comfort that we have, that familiarity, and how we're so close to those things. We don't see how that may be not what we even want to do, or maybe it's just something we have on autopilot, for lack of a better term. But like being able to have that, lack of a better term, partner to be able to help us to say, hey, have you looked at that? Did you consider this? And some of those questions I imagine that you're having with your clients is exactly what you take the people through.
Yeah, I'll stick with the sports analogy because for most of us, it's very visual. It's easy to see. We
Mhm.
watch games, we attach ourselves to athletes, etc. But you think about all the greats and take whoever you want, all of the greats have coaches. And the reason is simple the coaches aren't better, but they can see the whole field, right? Take whatever
Mhm.
analogy you want. They can see all the players, they can see different skill sets, they can see where things are working, where they're not. And so, again, the beauty is it's perspective. It's very easy to get dialed into whatever's right in front of us, especially if it's a big thing, right? We might be super focused on it. We might have a bunch of big things going on at one time. And so it's easy to get myopic on that. And so what it allows for us to do is, as coaches, we don't have any of the historical experience, right? We don't have any of the attachments that one might have to a person or a thing or a career path. Sometimes people don't want to give up their career because they've spent 20 or 25 or 30 years building it. But if it's not a place that they want to be now, just because it was 20 years ago, should you still be there? And so that's really what you said is it in a nutshell. The reason why coaches are and can be effective is again back to what I said. We're not better than you in terms of knowing where you need to be. We're simply not you. And that allows me to see crystal clear, hey, you told me X, but you're doing Y. And so there's a little bit of a mismatch there. And I'd like for you to tell me what's going on there. And so sometimes it's as simple as that, as somebody just highlighting it again from an objective perspective, just to allow the person the space to unpack it.
Yeah, and having that space is such a powerful thing, and I love that you kind of do that with your clients because I think so many times we can go through or meander through life and have that journey, and we can constantly be looking for people to kind of tell us what's the next route, what's the next step, what's the next, and I think we sometimes don't get and create that space to be able to just think through those things, unpack those things with what we're doing, but also probably on a deeper level within ourselves. And I think who better, like you said, than somebody that's not you to be able to shine the light on that and help you to kind of make sure you are where you want to be. So I know you touched on it a little bit, but I want to drill down a little bit more to hear a little bit more on how that process goes in terms of you working with your clients, how you serve them, and what you feel like might be a little bit of what I like to call your secret sauce and what sets you apart and makes you unique.
For sure. Process wise, the biggest thing is it's really exploratory, right? You have to go in with a really, really wide net, be really open to self discovery, right? Because some of the questions, and this is a potential reason why folks may not want to work with a coach, is they don't always want to find out some of these answers.
Mm,
They're better left untouched because finding the answers to some of these questions that we don't want to ask can really scare people. And
mm,
that's a good thing because it means there's something else there, right? If it's scary, there's something that has not been unpacked and dealt with. So that's really important. So while I do have, again, back to the navigation analogy, the client is going to set an agenda from the start and say, okay, broadly, I want to work on my career. Actually, my relationship has been a bit of a challenge, or I'm a new parent, and boy, that's been a bigger adjustment than I thought. But more often than not, Gresh, once we start down one path, all of a sudden there's a willingness to start opening other doors.
mm,
How's your relationship with your father? I know I listened to you early on. You talked about your father being in the military, right? And
yeah.
so, something that came up for me, and we haven't talked about this, but like, how's your relationship with him, right? And so these are
Hmm.
different areas that people can explore as they go. And so we want to honor the initial agenda, but we also want to maintain a lot of flexibility because, as you know, things come up along the way. Somebody might fall ill. Maybe somebody loses a job. Maybe you relocate. Maybe you want to start a new venture. You want to start podcasting. And so allowing that nimbleness, that flexibility to come up, and I like to allow energy to dictate it,
Mm.
right? So, how is somebody's energy towards a topic? How does it make you feel when I say a certain word or when you think about what you're going to be doing tomorrow? And so, what that allows is, again, the client to still dictate it, but it allows the coach to provide some accountability and some perspective and kind of bring it back to, hey, initially when we started out, we were talking about your career. We have since kind of moved into your physical health. Do you want to stay on this path or do you want to come back, or what does that look like for you? And so really it's allowing the client the control, but it's also giving them some bumpers a bit at times to say, pick a path and be very intentional for right now.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Those parameters end up being like so powerful in terms of doing that. And I almost wonder that since I feel like we are more and more going to a world where there aren't as many silos as they have been. I always hear work-life balance. I'm a big believer in work-life integration because all those things are working together. And as you mentioned, if you bring up a topic, that topic could affect your personal, could affect your work. I imagine that you have those conversations when that's happening too.
Big time. I think it's a big disservice that we do, even that phrase work life balance, right?
Hmm.
You are the same person wherever you go. It doesn't matter if you're at the gym, if you're playing basketball, if you're in this role currently, whatever it is you're doing, you're the same person. So something that's affecting one aspect of your life is without question bleeding over because our brains are not siloed, as you said. And so that's important to recognize is how do we blend them and be really intentional about giving each topic or situation, giving it its own space. Oftentimes I find that what's stressing a client bleeds over to another area and then subsequently has negative effects there. So the classic analogy would be you come home from work and you take it out on your spouse and kids,
Hmm.
right? And so how do we avoid that? The first thing is recognizing it and then figuring out sort of what the structure is, the framework around it. But I think that's an important part for everybody to recognize is we are the same person everywhere we go. So treat it as such, recognize that we're all connected physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically. We're all one. And so this idea that we can compartmentalize and sort of shut one version of ourselves off and become the other, I think it's nonsense. I think we kind of tell ourselves a little bit of a lie there. And so the way to get around that is to say, this is who I am and this is how I'm showing up unapologetically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I almost feel like to some degree the word that popped in my head was disservice. We're almost doing a disservice to, I think, the people that we're showing up for, but also on a deeper level to ourselves. So to be able to kind of recognize that, I think again gives you that opportunity to be able to start to see like how those things interact and maybe even delve deeper than sometimes we would have when we're just saying, hey, I just want to reach this goal. That's it. I don't want to talk about anything else, not realizing like all those other aspects play such a big part.
Very much so. That's a great comment. The disservice to ourselves. You're absolutely right. Think about some of these, again, stay with the athlete example. The athletes who
Mhm.
have accomplished a lot, they've also given up a lot, right? They've given up a lot to accomplish what they have in their sport. They've also sacrificed and given up on other things. And that's fine, right? There's no judgment, there's no right or wrong way, but it's just that it's a very intentional, deliberate decision. And what you said, are you doing yourself a disservice that 20 years later, you're not going to be able to flash back and go, oh, I'll do it differently this time. You
Mhm.
got one shot through this. Let's make sure it's the one that you're going to be the most comfortable with long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And so do you feel like your ability to be able to kind of understand that is part of like what sets you apart and makes you unique, that secret sauce? Because I almost think that hearing your story and seeing how you had that experience in the financial industry, but then you were able to have and are having those deeper conversations. Do you feel like you're able to kind of see the forest for the trees and able to help people kind of not necessarily drill in deeper there, but at least be a little bit more aware of the terrain?
Yeah. So they'll tell you when you go through a coaching program, they'll tell you that, again, back to the coach is not the expert. You are
Hmm.
your own expert, right? But there's an important part here in that life experience rolls up into, again, whatever professional role we have. And so being a parent allows me to be a different coach, right? For example.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I do think that's a big part of it, Gresh, is simply saying to folks, being able to hold people accountable in a very firm yet respectful way. You told me X, your actions are Y. What are your thoughts? Tell me what's going on here. And so I think there's a comfort being able to call people sort of on the carpet in a sense to themselves. There's a potential conflict in there, right? And it can feel uncomfortable. And I actually think that's something that I've really grown accustomed to, that I do well, is look, you hired me for a reason. You told me this is important to you. In order for me to effectively help you, we need to square this a bit. And so I think that's a big part of that. And honestly, just being really empathetic and letting them know they are not alone. So something I do when I coach is sometimes I will share with the client's permission. I'll share something that's maybe a similar struggle to what they're dealing with. And in
Hmm.
general, coaching philosophy would tell you that's kind of a no-no, but I believe the bond is strengthened when two people are experiencing a similar challenge. I think people recognize that and they gravitate towards it. And so I do, again, with their permission, I like to let them know, I like to share this with you because you're not alone out there. None of us are.
Yeah, absolutely. But it can sometimes feel that like that when, especially when you're going through the struggles. And I think I've heard so many times is it's not the things that are perfect in our lives. Sometimes it's the imperfect things or the struggles or the things that don't go as well that actually do bond us together. So I appreciate you, having those conversations and talking about those things because I think at the end of the day, it brings more trust, relatability, and then at the end of the day, I think it helps people to drill down deeper to get towards those goals and understand again the overall terrain of where they want to go.
Yes. Yeah,
Awesome,
absolutely
awesome.
right. I think an example that comes to mind for me is
Mhm.
anybody who's been through, like specifically, if you've survived like a plane crash or something very
Mhm.
traumatic like that, they talk about the lifelong bond that you have with a perfect stranger who just happened to be sitting next to you. You have a lifelong bond with somebody that went through a horrific scenario and came out on the other side. Things like that, absolutely, that can bond because there was a huge vulnerability to a total stranger and you had no choice but to bond with them because at that moment you needed each other in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the part that you brought up earlier is that sometimes we don't have to necessarily wait for those experiences to have that vulnerability and that
Yeah.
connection opportunity. So I love again like how impactful that is for imagine the people that you work with, but of course the overall society, world, community, all those things
Yes,
as though
can
doing
be
that too.
anybody. It truly can
Yes.
be anybody, right? People say who's best suited for a coach. Anybody that wants to better themselves in
Mm-hmm.
any facet of their life. I mean, if you want to be better, if you wake up in the morning and think, how can I be, excuse me, just 1% better today than I was yesterday, then a coach absolutely could be a great fit because of that. Huge benefit on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And that conflict is huge, or not even conflict, sometimes the back and forth, I think, because the saying is no pressure, no diamonds. And I think when you start to see that opportunity, that's where sometimes having that coach that's going to challenge you, like you mentioned, in a way that helps you to, they see you in such a great way. Sometimes we don't see ourselves, but we
Yes.
need that and we need to be held accountable for that to happen.
Gresh, so much of what coaching is convincing people to give themselves credit.
Mm,
Give yourself credit. Did you hear what you just went through? And you make it sound like it was you hit a pothole. No,
yeah.
no, the car veered off the road. You almost lost full control. And so much of it is really just giving them permission to pat themselves on the back and to recognize you've just went through this huge transition, this huge change, unexpected, whatever it might be. Wow, just take a breath, just take a minute. Say, you know what, I got through that. Maybe you didn't handle it as perfectly as you would have liked or with the grace that you wanted to or whatever. But you're through it and you're better for it. And how can we use it? I think that's the part, right? How can we use what happened yesterday, last week? Talked about the Super Bowl at the beginning. How are the Niners going to use this loss for the good? How
Mhm.
do you use that for the good going forward, personally, professionally, all of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So would you consider that to be what I like to call a little bit more of a CEO nugget? It's like an app, a book, or even a habit that you have, but something that makes you more effective and efficient. Is it that ability to be able to ask I don't know if I want to say the right questions, but ask those questions and look at things in a different perspective. Do you think that exercise could be a CEO hack for you?
Yeah, so actually, it ties into a book, Gresh. It's
Okay.
Mindset, Carol Dweck's book,
Ah,
Mindset.
yes.
And what she talks about in there, I think I'm going to get this mostly right. What she talks about is every opportunity, excuse me, every situation is an opportunity for you to learn something about yourselves. So, like one
Mm,
example that she used in there, and there were numerous, there were sports examples, there were academic examples. But one of the examples that really stuck with me, because I have kids who are elementary school,
mhm,
is how she used one specific teacher, for example, how the teacher asks herself what she can learn from 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kids. And
mm.
at first glance, I'm like, what's the kid going to teach her?
Right.
But she's right because she can evaluate her teaching methods. How are my kids responding? How's their behavior when I'm teaching a certain subject matter? And so, back specifically to your question, the situations that we have the potential to learn the most from are the ones that actually at the time kind of suck the most, right? The ones that suck the most. And so what I really force myself to do, and it's funny because my brain has this internal battle where one side of my brain knows it's going to happen, and the other's like, no, no, I want to be pissed off about it. No, I'm angry that this didn't go my way. And I say, this situation is a learning opportunity for me to learn something about myself that I didn't know before. And maybe it's testing my mettle and my perseverance and this new word of stick to itness. Maybe it's a way that I was approaching it this way before. Maybe I need to rotate 90 degrees and try it and find a more efficient, effective way to do it. And so that's a big one for me is recognizing that these really challenging situations, they're also learning opportunities of the biggest kind. And again, back to our comments earlier, yeah, oftentimes they're forced, they force your hand, but that's okay because you get the choice of the response. You get to choose how you respond. What do you do? Do you fold up shop and go cry? Or do you buckle down and say, you know what, maybe I need a little perspective, or I can just go right back in there and start doing what I was doing? So it's a great opportunity, again, to learn about yourself and figure out what you're made of, what you can do differently, how you come out better for it on the other side.
I absolutely love that, and that choice word is so powerful. It kind of reminds me of a quote is that everything's not happening to me; it's happening for me. So even
Yes.
when things don't go the way we want them to go, we talked about the 49ers and those things that don't go the way we want them to go, but it can be an opportunity if you look at it as opportunity. If you act it, I imagine if all those things happen, then again, it starts to change the way you look at life and starts to change the way experiences happen as well too for you.
Yeah. I'm gonna make a connector there. I also agree with that. That was a huge shift. And it's funny, right? Because it's one word.
Yeah.
It's instead of it's two, it's four. That's it. It's
Hmm.
all it is, right? The other one I was thinking of was you have this opportunity that pops up. that, again, it might have been forced, but it's also a gift. It
Mm.
really is a gift because we don't always get to choose what happens, but we always get to choose our response to what happens. And that's been a big one. This might be kind of the CEO nugget thing.
Mhm.
You really have to recognize what can you control and what you cannot control.
Mm.
And don't waste your time and energy because it's easy to do. And I'm guilty of it. So I'll be the first one to pipe up and go, man, I've spent too much time, wasted energy, frustration about a situation that I didn't want to happen, as opposed to simply saying, how am I going to craft my response accordingly and direct my energy there? And so maybe that's another one that kind of ties into both of happening for you, but also, again, how are you going to choose to respond? Control what you can control, make that your focus of where your energy goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I had an internship, and my boss would always say that control what you can control because you try to control the things that don't have that control, and you end up getting frustrated, spending all that energy on there
Yep.
rather than controlling the things that you can, and you end up being a lot lighter, have a better perspective. Just phenomenal things I think start to happen from there.
Yes, well said.
Awesome,
Smart
awesome.
boss too.
There you go.
Smart boss.
Yes. So, what would you consider to be your answer to my absolute favorite question, which is the definition of what it means to be a CEO? And our goal is to have different quote unquote CEOs on the show. So, Craig, what does being a CEO mean to you?
It really means freedom, Gresh. There's creative freedom, there's time freedom, there's freedom from money. The creative one, I'll stick with just for a moment and say, I didn't think I was that much a creative until I started my own business. And then I was like, oh, this is a wonderful part of it. I see the smile on your face. And so I know you can relate. The creative freedom is incredible, right? I mean, you get to, in a large extent, you get to choose the path you go, who you work with. And I think that's an important part, especially you didn't touched on retirement earlier. When we think about how we spend our days, one of the things I really harp on with people who are still working and thinking about retirement is right now, your coworkers you spend more time with
Mhm.
than your own family, your spouse, your kid. You spend more time with your coworkers than anybody out there. And so, who are you spending your time with? Do you like them as people? Do you like the mission that you're on collectively? And so for me, having that freedom, being able to talk to folks like yourself, being able to hopefully spark something in people and get them thinking in a different way, and hoping that some inspiration and some change can come along. But the freedom that comes with, again, running your own business, not having to run ideas by people or have compliance approve it or anything is a really big thing for me. So I'm really enjoying that aspect of it.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like, and I think it ends up being something so powerful. Often compare it to like having a paintbrush in your hands, and you have the freedom to be able to chart that path and create that easel or paint that easel and create that mural in the way that you see fit. And I think I think it's so much in line with everything that you do because you start to again create space for your clients to start to have those conversations. What do you want to paint? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And I think whether we're talking about a business or your life or anything like that, we sometimes forget we have that paintbrush in our hands.
Big time, right? People do. Because again, you think about people's trajectories and you think about maturity levels, even the courage, right? Courage is something that really should grow with age. And so it can be really tricky when you're in your, let's say, late teens, early, mid, late 20s, early 30s. It could be really challenging to come up with the courage to make the move that's going to best suit you for the long term because you might upset some people along the way. You might surprise people, you might disappoint people. And that's an important part of what coaches can do is they can free people from the others' expectations and allow them that. So that's a great comment about the recognition you do have the power. And some of these limiting beliefs might be coming from, again, an old belief system, society. Society tells you you got to be doing this. Well, what do you think?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's so powerful to be able to ask those questions. So, Craig, truly appreciate that definition. Of course, I appreciate your time even more. So, what I want to do now is pass you the mic, so to speak, just to see if there's anything additional that you can let our readers and listeners know, and of course, how best they can get a hold of you and find out about all the awesome things you're working on.
Absolutely. I'll give them the easy ones first. You can go find Coach 360 on LinkedIn, Craig Colvett on LinkedIn as well. That's where all my content goes. And you can find some resources there for yourself. Again, the Coach 360 business kind of pairs up to the financial advisor world. So that could be something as well. I think when I look back on sort of my personal arc, and I share this because, again, it's a bit of a vulnerability, but maybe it sparks somebody else. It's that I really would have liked if I could have reassessed more frequently and earlier of where I was in
Mm,
my overall arc. And that's what I would implore people to do is look, you might be right where you're supposed to be, and you might have this big exercise as far as asking these really important questions, and you might end up right back at the same spot, but you will never regret the exercise of asking and answering those questions. And I think putting that into place, right? So I think about where we are at this time of the year, kind of just sprung into the new year, new goals for the year. So that sort of process, right? Where maybe it is early December, you sort of reevaluate where one is in the overall arc, personally, professionally, all of it, and just ask themselves what's working, what's draining me, what's providing me energy. We talked about that earlier. What's giving me energy? Gosh, I love playing softball. Instead of playing one night a week, could I play 2 nights a week? Should I join a doubleheader league? Why not? And so these are questions that I would just love for people to ask themselves: is what's working? Where can I see improvements? And again, it's not about getting the answers from somewhere else. It's about finding them. But what people will find is you'll start to get comfortable with that process. So as a coach, I still get coached because I find that to be the most effective, but I'm pretty good at coaching myself also. I'm pretty good at it, right? And it's just because that process has become part of who I am. So if my kids are acting up, I'm saying they need something from me and they can't verbalize it. What do they need? And so that's what I want to encourage people to do is say, look, just take stock of where you are and where you'd like to be and ask who can help along that journey.
awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Craig. We're going to have the links and information in the show notes, of course, for people to follow up with you. But thank you so much for that last point. I think it's so powerful to realize that not only can we start to ask those questions of like where our life is, things that we want to change or things that we want to do, but on a deeper level, we can start to answer those questions and take action related to that. So thank you so much for holding space for so many people to do that. And I hope you have a phenomenal rest of the day.
Same to you. Thanks for having me, Gresh.